A comment I see made fairly regularly in the guitar community is that Gibson Les Pauls are overpriced and they are too expensive, particularly in relation to Fender, and that this offers better value for money. So in this video, I want to do some exploring of this claim and see how valid it is and whether it's true or whether maybe it's not true. So both of these guitars I've got in this video are USA models, although the Fender's from 1994, so it doesn't really count to today's prices, but nonetheless. So let's just go straight into this. The claim that the Gibson Les Paul standard is too expensive. The first thing I think is worth mentioning is that the Gibson guitar that says Gibson on the headstock is made in the USA. Okay, so to justify this claim that the Les Paul is too expensive, Gibson's too expensive, I think the first thing to do is compare it to other USA manufacturers, other USA models. We have to remember that guitars that are built overseas or outside of the USA by brands in the USA were specifically done to make them cheaper. Okay, so Fender and Gibson, and they went overseas, they went to countries with cheaper labor prices, specifically so they can make cheaper guitars. So we can't really bring Epiphone into this consideration. We can't bring Fender's Mexican models into this. We need to compare Gibson USA with other USA made guitars. So I think this is where a big part of this perception comes from that Gibson's too expensive. I think there's two things. One, people are drawn to the Les Paul standard. They see the price tag off the standard. I think that is what a Gibson costs. And secondly, I think you see Fender, and indeed PRS, but I'll mostly focus on Fender in this video. You see Fender's logo on the headstock of guitars made outside of America. So the Mexican guitars, the guitars made in Asia over the years. I've got a Japanese Telecaster behind me, it's got Fender on the headstock. So these guitars obviously come in cheaper than USA models because they're made overseas, but they still say Fender on them. So we're quite used to seeing Fender on guitars at lower price points. You don't really see this with Gibson because any guitar that says Gibson on it is made in the USA. And then the Epiphone models are the ones made in Asia. They're the ones that come in cheaper. So just as a first thing, I think the important consideration is just brand and price perception based on what we see here, rather than more of an objective analysis of what they're selling for. So the second thing I want to mention is with the standards, just actually for transparency, this isn't a standard, this is a custom shop, but it's the Les Paul I've got closest to hand, and it looks the same. So the standard is not the cheapest Les Paul, it's not the cheapest Gibson. Okay, so the standard, if you compare it to some other models like the Studio, the Juniors, this has binding on the body and the fretboard. That's one, it's an aesthetic difference, but it adds to the price. But it's not the cheapest model. It's perhaps the most popular, I'm not sure, we'd need to look at some actual sales numbers. But in this video I'm going to look at, I'm going to use Sweetwater as the price comparison. I'm going to look at, although I'm in the UK, I'm going to use US dollars for comparing the prices, mainly because I think most people watching this video will be in America, and I think it's a pretty good, it's the country that we're talking about, it's where the guitars are made, and I think it's a good basis for people to work out the how it compares to their own currency. So first things first, the Les Paul standard on Sweetwater today is priced at between $2,000 and $2,700. Now these are normal prices. This isn't Black Friday special. This isn't any sales and discounts. Between $2,000 for a plain top, up to $2,700 for more of a figure top. So there are Sweetwater exclusives and some signature models, and they can be more expensive, but I just want to focus on the regulars, the standards, if you will. Between $2,000 and $2,700. Now remember, the claim is that they're overpriced, they're too expensive, and you should be looking at other models like you can get a Strat for cheaper. Okay, so $2,700 at the top end for a Les Paul standard on Sweetwater in US dollars. They also have a Fender Strat with the Lux line for $2,700. So the Ultra Lux line. So the Fender Ultra Lux Stratocaster is being sold on Sweetwater, the same website as I mentioned for the Les Pauls, for around $2,700. So exactly the same price, okay? So first things first is you can get the Strat and you can get the Les Paul Standard for about the same price. And then we can look cheaper. Like I said, the Standard is not the entryway into Gibson. It's not the cheapest guitar, but we kind of talk about it like it is. A lot of the times it is spoken about as what a Gibson costs, as if it's representative of the brand. So let's look cheaper. With Sweetwater, US dollars, Les Paul models start around $1,350, $1,350 thereabouts. That's for the modern light. And then Gibson's also recently released this new version of the Studio. Now the Studio has always been considered to be a standard without the bling. So it doesn't have a binding on the fretboard or the body, for example. The new version does have fretboard binding. It does have push-pull knobs for coil splits. It has a few adornments to it that you'd normally see on the Standard at the higher price points. The new Studio is kind of encroaching here with these features, and it sells for around $1,500. The Les Paul Junior is in the same territory. So we can get into Gibson Les Paul, specifically Les Pauls, not looking at other models here, around $1,300 to $1,500. That's the entry point. So straight away we can see this is significantly cheaper than the Standard. We're looking at $1,300 to $1,500 for the entry point, and then the Standards with the flame tops around about $2,700. So, you know, depending on which one you go for, there's between $500 and almost $1,000 difference. But what about Fender? So Fender has quite a lot of lines. In my opinion, they get quite confusing, but I'll save that for another day. The American Performer model, again Stratocasters here, between $1,250 and $1,450, and the Professional 2 line between $1,700 and $1,800. So the USA Strat, you're looking $1,250-ish up to $1,800-ish for these lower lines, and then compare that to Gibson's lower lines, Les Pauls, $1,350 up to $1,500, give or take. So actually we can see that there's remarkable parity between the two brands here. From if you're looking to get a USA Fender, you're looking to get a Gibson, which is by default made in the USA, actually they're very, very similarly priced. Now, of course, as I said before, but just to repeat the point, I'm not talking about Mexican vendors, I'm not talking about Epiphones or these brands, these guitars made outside of the USA. That's not the point of this video. I'm comparing USA with USA. And the reason for that is, when the claim is that Gibson's overpriced, we need to bear in mind that Gibson is an American-made guitar brand. So we need to compare it with other American-made guitar brands. And what we can see when we do that is actually Fender's not cheaper. And in fact, I think there's an argument to be made that the Fender is worse value. Now, I want to be clear when I say this, that I like Fender, I play Fender, but just looking at this objectively, the Gibson here it's a mahogany body with a maple cap. So that's two different wood types. It's got a set neck, so it's glued in, and it's got a nitro finish. Nitro takes longer to apply and finish. If we compare that to the Strat here, the Strat is it's just a flat piece of wood. Okay, there's no separate wood cap on top of it. It's a bolt-on neck, and it's a poly finish, which is kind of like plastic. Now, I'm not making any comment on pros and cons of nitro versus poly, but just as a consideration of how they're made. Fender has the simpler construction process. These are quicker to put together, they're cheaper to put together. There's no binding on it either, I forgot to mention. With the Les Paul, there's binding on that at the Standards, not, as I said before, on the cheaper models. Unless if we put these side by side, it's pretty clear that the Fender is quicker and cheaper to make. than the Les Paul. What about other brands? It could just be that Fender's too expensive. So I think the other big name to consider is PRS. So PRS, like Fender, puts its name on guitars made in the USA and outside the USA. Outside the USA is the SE line, and that's generally much cheaper than its USA models. So I'm going to ignore those for the time being. For the American models, the core model, which is its sort of premium line before you get to private stock, these are priced at the same rough price point as Gibson Custom Shop. So significantly more expensive than a Les Paul Standard, significantly more expensive than the Fender Ultra Luxe, and certainly the cheap models there too. So to get a true PRS made in America guitar is not in the same price point of Fender or Gibson. PRS does have the cheaper guitar with the S2 line, which is sort of assembled in America using some of the components from the Asia line. So that's what they would consider sort of a midway point, and that is cheaper. I think that's probably slightly cheaper than a Standard, and it's, you know, in that ballpark again. So, but nothing there that would make you say it demonstrates that Gibson's overpriced. It's, if you want the made in America PRS guitar, fully made in America, it's significantly more expensive. And then there are the more boutique brands, or smaller brands. Maybe boutique's the wrong word for these, but take a company like Sur. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. The cheapest one as of today, this is early December 2024, the cheapest model for them is an open box model for $2,699. Every other guitar from this brand is above $3,000. And these guitars come with a gig bag, not a hard case, which the Gibson would come with. They've got the bolt-on neck, again, some kind of manufacturing processes that indicate it would be quicker to put together, or simpler to put together, if not quicker. And again, this isn't to disparage any of the manufacturing processes, not to say the guitar's better or worse, and I'm not trying to imply that they're made quickly. You know, there could well be other stages along the process where they do take more time or there's more consideration, but the end result is a guitar with a bolt-on neck costing you $3,000 and up. So that's more expensive than a Les Paul Standard, and the guitar is made in the USA. And the other brand I'd like to mention is Collings. Collings, for anyone who's heard of them, you would know it has an incredibly good reputation for high quality guitars, exceptional craftsmanship. But the price for them, again, is Gibson Custom Shop territory. They cost thousands and thousands of dollars, and you're not going to be able to just walk in and get one for the money of a Les Paul Standard. In fact, when I bought this, which is a custom shop, it is more expensive than a Standard. I played a Collings, it was second hand, and still in a similar price point, slightly cheaper than a custom shop because it was second hand, but it was still more expensive than a Standard, and it was used. So you need to have, you know, deeper pockets if you're looking at that kind of brand. So I think on balance it's pretty clear that the Gibson as a brand is not overpriced. The Les Paul as a model is not overpriced. The Standard, for whatever reason, I don't know why, popularity I guess, the Standard gets the focus. People look at the price tag of a Standard and then decide that's the blanket cost of Gibson. So if this costs $3,000, Gibson's cost $3,000, it's too expensive, I can get a Fender for half of that. And an Epiphone for significantly less than that too. But the reality is that's not true. The Standard is not the cheapest Les Paul. So, well, not only is it not the cheapest Les Paul, you can buy American-made Fenders for the same price point for these models. The cheaper Les Pauls, the slightly more expensive Les Pauls, the Standards, and up, you know, and up to custom shop as well. There are Fenders, like USA Fenders are right there too. There's remarkable parity in the prices. And then there are the smaller brands, the boutique brands, which are more expensive again. So in my opinion, the claim that the Gibson is overpriced and too expensive suggests that it's kind of an outlier, right? That it's more expensive because that's in comparison to comparable guitars. Comparable meaning guitars made in the same country with, you know, labor laws and health benefits, so employment benefits, healthcare, 401k, minimum wage considerations, and all those kind of things. You can't compare Gibson made in the USA with Fender made in Mexico, or Epiphone, or Squier. If they were truly overpriced, we would see American brands selling cheaper guitars and really owning that market. Why wouldn't they own that market? There's no one there. As I said, Fender's lower USA models are the same price as Gibson's lower models. There's opportunity below that price for an American guitar brand to capture that market. The fact it doesn't exist suggests that there's no profit to be made there, which means that they're not too expensive. So actually I want to just clarify that last point. When I say too expensive, obviously this is you know, affordability is a personal thing, but I'm trying to take a step back from this and say too expensive as in, what does the market look like? The market looks like Gibson and Fender doing USA made guitars from around $1,300 and up, and then other brands starting significantly more expensive than that. So if it was possible to have guitars made in the USA in a profitable business for less than that, we would see it, and we're not really seeing it. And indeed, actually, the guitars that come in slightly cheaper than those entry points are the ones made outside of the USA, and those guitars are getting more and more expensive all the time. So I think that wraps it up. My point here is that if you are put off from a Les Paul, if you're put off with Gibson overall and a Les Paul in particular because you've heard they're too expensive or you think they're too expensive, I don't think it's true at all. I think that there is there's an unfair comparison where people compare the price of a more expensive Gibson with a cheaper Fender or cheaper other brands and assume it's too expensive. The reality is you can buy cheaper Gibsons, and when you do a genuine comparison between one guitar made in the USA and another guitar made in the USA, the price parity is surprising, actually. I think a lot of people get surprised when they see what a Fender or USA Fender costs and the different price points of Gibson as well. All too often, I think people see Fender at a cheaper price point, see Gibson at a higher price point, and actually what they're comparing, maybe unintentionally, is just Gibson Les Paul Standard with maybe a Fender Player Plus model made in Mexico. Fender's lines don't say Mexico. Some of them say American. The Ultra Lux doesn't, but there's the American Performer, the American Professional. You know, these kind of say these are made in America, but they don't say Fender Player Plus made in Mexico. So it's very easy to not know that. If you go online and you search for a Fender Stratocaster or Telecaster or whatever, and filter by price, low to high perhaps, you'll see the guitars first that aren't made in America, and then you go to Gibson, which are all made in America, and of course they can look more expensive. So I understand how this confusion happens. It's very easy. You have to actually be quite intentional looking for the American vendors to know that's specifically what you're looking at. But when you do that, there's not the big difference that people often assume at first. But let me know what you think. Do you think the Gibsons are too expensive? Do they get a bad rap? Has this video given you anything to think about on it? I think as a final point, my opinion would be they're not too expensive, they're not overpriced. They are expensive. You can buy cheaper guitars, but if we're talking in comparison, particularly when we factor in the construction process of them, my personal opinion is it's an unfair claim that they are too expensive. But I'm interested to hear your thoughts.